Hi there, and welcome to Going the Distance with Go Along. I am here with Rebecca Ferguson, who is getting ready to release a book called 3,000 Orgasms. And I am so excited to talk to her about her book. Her journey is incredibly compelling. I met her through a Substack working group, and we got to talking and found that, there's a lot of overlap in terms of the demographics that she's serving versus the demographic that Go Long is servicing as well. And I'm so excited for this conversation. I will say that we are going to be talking about very adult conversation topics here. So if you happen to be listening to this with young children around that you may not want to hear some of this stuff, I'm just going to give you a heads up that that's something you might want to be aware of. And we're not holding back here. We're just going to get right into it. So I'm really excited. So Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you so much. It's great to be dialing in from Australia and having this chat with you, Jill. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah. So how did you get to this point? Like, did you just wake up one day and say, like, I'm just going to write a book about 3,000 orgasms?
My girlfriends were really pushing me to write the book after they knew that I'd had the year of 3,000 orgasms. It all started back in 2019 when I started using a tool called Nice, and it's a sex tracking app that my partner had recommended to me because he knew I was a bit of a data nerd. I had gone through the process of tracking all of my breastfeeding with my children, and I just really enjoyed looking at the patterns and the trends in what was going on there. And he knew that I was probably going to enjoy seeing the patterns that might emerge in our sex life through tracking them in the app. We had and still have an amazing sex life, and I didn't realize how many orgasms there were until it got to be later on in the year. This was 2020, and so it was the year of the pandemic. We were locked down a lot here in Melbourne. It was quite politically fraught, actually, the amount of lockdown we had. My kids were home, but they were of the age where we could say we were spending time having a rest or having a chat in the room to make time for our sex life. And we made time for it. My coaching practice, it was still going, but it was definitely not as busy as it was before COVID hit. And we had this amazing year of exploration and amazing pleasure. And when I got to the end of the year, it was actually 3,079 orgasms. But just to round it off, I called it the year of 3,000 orgasms. And as I said, my girlfriends were amazed and have kept at me for the last 3 years, 4 years to write about this. And yeah, about a year and a bit ago, I started writing the book, and it's ready for release at the end of January.
So crazy time for you. I can't believe we're getting this conversation in because I'm sure you have a lot to do. You're not burdened by the pandemic. So lots of engagements to promote the book, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to get myself out there and tell people about the book. You mentioned that we met on Substack, and Substack has been an amazing platform for me to build an audience beyond what I have on social media. It's great. It's a really high engagement platform, which has been fantastic in terms of getting the word out about the book.
And we'll make sure that we get in the show notes. We're going to put in all your social media and where people can find the book. Like, when is it being released in the U.S.? Do you have an idea, or is it same day?
Same day. So January 31st.
Okay.
So yeah, it'll go live on Amazon. I'm just keeping it on Amazon for now, at this stage, so that it can be in the Kindle Unlimited program. and there'll be a paperback available as well. One of my girlfriends said to me she will definitely not be buying it as a paperback because she doesn't want it sitting on her bookshelf and her kids asking her what it's about. She's quite sex negative. She's not like me with my kids. But yeah, some other people may want to put it on their bookshelves as something provocative to spark a conversation, either, with friends or with their partner. I think it's a conversation starter for many people.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the title itself is very catchy, but I think it's interesting what you're talking about in terms of your relationship with your kids and being sex negative, sex positive. So I had a pediatrician on probably like 2 or 3 months ago, and they focus on puberty, actually. And the company's called Turning Teen. And what she talks about is that it's a lot easier if you start talking to your kids about body parts and normalizing the conversation as early as possible, so that way things don't become taboo. That was like one of the things that she said is key in kind of making kids comfortable talking to you as a parent about like uncomfortable situations, and things that should matter when you're encountering these situations when you're dating and whatnot. So
Yeah. I mean, I actually write about this in the book because I talk about my whole sexual history or relationship with sex from a very young age. I think we all remember when we first learned about what sex was in a very, age appropriate, hopefully, way. Someone told us in the playground or a neighbor or a cousin or someone like that. And one of the things I read many years ago, I don't know who wrote it or said it, but that when children are talking to their parents about sex, particularly younger children, they're listening for the melody, not the lyrics. In other words, they're noticing your body language and how awkward you seem about it, rather than actually what you're telling them about sex. And I've always kept that in mind with my kids, that anytime they ask me anything, and my son in particular is very curious, he'll ask me very direct questions. He asked me once how many times I had sex with his father when we were married. I hadn't tracked my sex life with his father, but I estimated how many times. I worked it out, and I gave him an answer, and I was straight with him about it. And I was very conscious of the melody, as I say, that he saw that I was comfortable answering that question. And he's 10, but he asked me that when he was 8. Yeah, so it's very much a sex positive. My kids know that I've written this book. My daughter, who's 12, is quite embarrassed about it. She's just at that age.
yeah,
But
anything
my
you do is going
son,
to be embarrassing.
yeah. But it's part of a parent's job, right? To be
Yeah.
embarrassing.
I think what also is funny is that I remember, like, my husband and I don't have kids, but a lot of times when you're talking to parents and like their kid says something, like they say a swear word and they're 3 years old, and you want to laugh because you know they don't mean it like in an angry way, but you have to be careful not to laugh so that this way they don't just keep saying it just to get a rise out of you. So that kind of aligns with the whole melody versus the lyrics mindset around, how do you react in these conversations? But I think what you're saying is, similar, is that normalizing the discussion. So it's like, okay, this is what happened at school. Someone did this and blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what that means. Let's talk about, like privacy and what's about with that and what's appropriate and all of those things. So I think that's a good way of looking at it. So thank you, Rebecca. Do you want to talk a little bit about, like, you alluded to, you were married previously and
Yes.
you're not anymore to that person. So in terms of, that was clearly part of your journey around how you got to 3,000 orgasms. So what do you want to say in terms of how that influenced where you are now?
Yeah, well, the subtitle of the book is How I Went from a Sexless Marriage to a Multi-Orgasmic Wonderland. The last 2 years of my marriage were sexless. So basically, after my son was conceived, we had sex one more time. And My ex-husband was, and I think probably still is, quite sex negative. He was raised in a very conservative Catholic household and where sex was a taboo subject. And we met when we were 24, and he was only my second real boyfriend. And I was really only his second real girlfriend. And I think we were quite naive about what marriage entailed. I think we got swept up in all of our friends getting engaged and married. And we were having a reasonable quantity of sex. And so I thought that meant that was a good sex life. But of course, we all know as the years go on, we begin to understand ourselves better and what we need from a sexual standpoint. And he was very reluctant to talk about sex and to try new things. And I was definitely more adventurous, more interested, more curious about sex, always had been. And I think he had some postnatal depression, as did I after our son was born. And I think that made it difficult for him to connect with me in an intimate way. I would initiate sex and he would decline, which was very hurtful.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a very painful period, but I mourned the end of that relationship. I tried to leave him. He was also quite controlling and verbally abusive. And I tried to leave that relationship quite a few times before we finally did end it after 16 years together. And I was ready to launch myself out and to be desired by a man again or men. And I had what my girlfriends still refer to as the summer of Rebecca after our marriage ended. They got me on Tinder the next day. And I was just amazed after being told I was unattractive and not, worthy of sexual intimacy for so many years, that there were suddenly so many men who were interested in that. And of course they were on an app like Tinder. So I had a bountiful, joyous, exploratory summer, 6 months, where I really let myself be my true sexual self and discover things about my body, learn to trust my body again, learn to love my body again in a way that I hadn't for a long time.
So much to unpack there. It's interesting that you say love my body because, we're recording this right after the new year. And I posted on Instagram to people and I said yesterday, like, if there's one thing that if you could improve this year, like one habit you want to add for this year, what would it be? And someone said, I want to love my body. And what I told them is that you need to kind of flip that around. You show love to your body by moving your body, by engaging in different activities, sex being one of them, right? So masturbation, definitely part of self-love, right? But also asking for what you want when you're with a partner is also self-love. Advocating for yourself is also part of that self-love equation. So
Absolutely.
I think there's that. And then, the other thing is that in college, we always talked, if you like hooked up, there was like the walk of shame. But then in 30 Rock, with Tina Fey's character, she talked about the stride of pride.
Yes. I love that show.
Yeah, so you did a lot of strides of pride.
I did. Yeah, I really did. And I was aware of that expression, the walk of shame, but I didn't buy into it. There was something inside me that made it, even though I didn't know that expression, stride of pride, that celebrated even the lackluster episodes that I had with men during that time. And I talk about some of those in the book. I celebrated that I had those opportunities to learn what was good for me and what wasn't, and what enhanced my sense of self and my love for my body and what it could do.
So when you started to chart, right? You're a data person. You said that. I'm a data person too. So as I'm recovering from my hip replacement, I'm looking at my data from the first hip replacement. And of course, I'm being competitive with that, which is completely ridiculous. And in this context, it's completely ridiculous. I'm 4 years older. There were different symptoms, everything, but whatever. But did you have a goal when you decided to, like, you're like, okay, you got the app from your partner and you're like, all right, I'm data driven. Did you have a goal in mind in terms of a number? Like, you just were like, I'm just tracking this. I'm just going with it. And we're going to see what happens.
It was about the tracking. It was just about understanding the patterns and how different sexual acts might lead to more orgasms. I think that was a goal, working out what type of sex led to more orgasms. And the data didn't give me a huge amount of insight when I did a thorough, like, statistical analysis of it. I had to get others involved in that. I'm not a statistician. I did, statistics at university, but to do all of that really complicated regression analysis and all of that, I had to get other people involved. But just looking at it from just putting it into an Excel spreadsheet and analysing it in that respect, there were insights in terms of times of day. So late morning tended to have a better chance of achieving greater orgasms for me. But no, there wasn't a goal in terms of a number. And someone just wrote to me on Substack yesterday saying, what's the next goal? 5,000, 10,000. I said, no, I don't think there'll ever be a 3,000 plus year again. I think it was a unique set of circumstances, being locked down with the pandemic. And one of the other things is that I actually got uterine cancer in 2021 and still managed 1,500 orgasms during the year. I still prioritized my sex life during that time. I didn't want to lose my connection to sex while I was going through cancer treatment. But the numbers of orgasms have sat more around the sort of 1,000 per year mark since then, 1,500 and then 1,000, and I think as low as 800. The cancer journey really took its toll on our relationship. But last year it was up, I think, around 1,100.
Well, yeah, I mean, cancer under the best of circumstances is always going to, be incredibly stressful and on all facets of your life. And then when you're talking about uterine cancer, as it pertains to sex, in terms of just the types of sensitivity and there's so many things that will impact that.
I had a radical hysterectomy. I had everything out, and there's no doubt there were nerves and parts of me cut out that previously gave me sensations that I now no longer have. So it's not as easy as it was.
Yeah, and I mean, and obviously, just where are the incisions? From when they operated, so just in terms of that, forget about the nerve sensitivity, just in terms of the stitches healing properly. And, you got to get really creative on the positioning.
Yeah. I talk about that in the book too.
Yeah. I mean, you just got to get creative.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when I had my first hip replacement, there had to be some creativity for a little while.
Yeah.
And there'll be creativity again.
But I think it points to something about humanity, you know, that, and I always say to friends who are a little bit sex negative, really, we're on this planet to have sex, to reproduce, and whether you're reproducing or not, you know, it's a basic human drive. And I love it when people talk about getting creative, you know, working around things that try and somehow tamper down their sex lives, you know. And that's what my partner and I tried to do. We continued to prioritize sex even during that difficult time of post-surgical recovery and then the chemotherapy. Um, it was still a priority for us, and that's one of the lessons in the book, is that sex can, and I don't like to use the word should, but you know, I hope it's a priority for people. I hope people who pick up my book will be the people where it is a priority, and can find ways to prioritize it into their busy lifestyles, as I've tried to do.
Yeah. Look, it's like with anything, whether it's going to the gym or, you know, trying to make time to read more or whatever it is, you have to be willing to give something up in order to make something else happen. And especially, you know, we're in the time of New Year's resolutions, as I said earlier, and everyone talks about like, oh, I want to do this. But I think the main thing that's missing when people say they set this goal is that they don't actually think about, well, what are they willing to meaningfully take out of their life to make space for incorporating that new thing so that they can keep at it on a sustainable way, right? And I don't feel that. So if you're sitting there and you're like, hey, you know, yeah, I want to be having more, you know, more sex or more meaningful sex or whatever that goal is, it's that, well, something is going to have to give to make that happen. And you have to be willing to part with that thing basically for a long enough period of time until you making time for sex is like a built-in habit that becomes a non-negotiable.
Yeah. And I talk about that in my book and some of my Substack posts as well, about actually creating a vision for your sex life. I think we're very good at creating a health plan or a fitness plan or a diet plan or a career plan or a money plan. And I think part of my whole philosophy on this with the tracking and envisioning work that I've done in this space is actually allowing particularly women the space in their minds to concentrate on their intimate lives, on their sexuality, to create a plan for how this is going to be an important part of their lives and not something that's an afterthought, which I think I think for a lot of women it's not an afterthought. I think it is something that's important to them, but the immediacy of children demanding time, or your boss demanding time, or your partner demanding time in other ways, or elderly parents, all of these demands on our time push sex into a lesser position, I guess, in our rankings of priorities. And my book is about trying to push it up that ranking, because it creates so many good things for us when we can have meaningful, pleasurable sexual encounters in our lives.
When you're talking about women in the sandwich generation, where everybody wants a piece of you, and then there's the household stuff as well, which generally falls on the woman in the relationship, right? There's, you know, these people already aren't making time for themselves even to go to the gym. And then a lot of times they're going through perimenopause. So they're already on top of that, they're already lacking that confidence in their body and not feeling positive about themselves, going back to that self-love part of our conversation, which then which just exacerbates the problem, right?
It does. It's a really difficult time. And I did not go through perimenopause because I went through surgical menopause. I had menopause thrust on me in 24 hours. And I had all the symptoms, and I still do. And I'm on hormone replacement therapy to deal with my low estrogen levels, and occasionally some testosterone therapy as well, which I might add is amazing for your sex drive. So I encourage women who are in perimenopause or postmenopausal who feel like they're lacking some of that drive, and that it may be becoming an issue in their relationship with their partner, to investigate their hormone levels, not just estrogen, but testosterone as well, because my doctor found that I was low in testosterone, and supplementing that really did assist in increasing my libido and my desire to connect with my partner. So I don't want to put any pressure on anyone. I think the book is not about saying this is something that everyone has to achieve. I think it's far from that. I've proven that it's only been possible once for me to achieve in my life, and not since. And I think, as you say, the sandwich generation has so much pressure on them coming from all directions, women in particular. And I guess the message from the book is that there is a broader vision that is possible, but you've got to make that work within what you have, and not make it an added pressure, an added demand that becomes something negative. I read about, a lot of couples where there's a mismatch in libidos and the woman feels the pressure to have sex as sort of a maintenance thing, or an obligation, and it just makes it completely unsexy for them. So there's work to be done, I think, not just for women, but for the men in our lives as well. And one of the really surprising things for me in creating my Substack as a sort of a runway platform into the launch of the book, I have 60% male subscribers to my Substack, and 80% of my paid subscribers are men. And a lot of the engagement I get is from men, messages and comments on my posts, because they are seeing this book as an opportunity to learn about how they can help their wives or their partners to lead a more fulfilling sex life. And of course, they've got their own motives in that. But it's been really heartening for me, because it has to be a dual effort. It can't just be the woman turning herself around and trying to make it work. I think there's a lot of material out there on what men can do, and I've tried to write in my Substack and on my blog some information that can help the men in partnerships where perhaps sex has taken a back seat, to make it more of a forefront activity and something that is enjoyable for both the woman and the man.
Now, have you had any men who are in what we'll call the stereotypical woman position, where they're struggling with their sex drive, and their partner, who we'll say just happens to be female, takes more of we'll call the stereotypical male position, where basically they swap positions in terms of who's initiating and who is trying to get the enthusiasm to engage in sex? Have you been encountering some of your community talking about that? or not yet?
Not in Substack, but through coaching. Yeah, I've dealt with couples in that circumstance where it's been reversed from there's the stereotype of the man having the high drive and the woman not being interested, and it's it's a long process, of coaching and reading, and both partners being ready to make the efforts. It's like what you talked about before. It's when you're taking something new on, you've got to think about what you're going to give up in order to get what you're after. And so it's I think male loss of libido is well documented, and I think there's there's a lot of shame around it, and it's difficult for men to bring up. But at the same time, I feel like the medical or wellness establishment has dedicated a fair bit of effort to assisting men in that space, whereas I think women have been, until recently, left out of those conversations and those innovations. I think the fact that there's a Viagra and there isn't something as widely available that can assist women, is just one example of how the establishment has really prioritized male sexuality over women's sexuality.
Definitely. I mean, what I was thinking about more of is there's obviously being able to, have an erection and whatnot, but then there's just the actual just enthusiasm for having just that low sex drive where even if there's, you get tested, you have the testosterone and all that, but there's just the guy's not into it. And it's those people out there where they may want to, how did they, I could see them coming to you and reading the book and figuring out okay, how do I work through this? How do I get my mojo back? Not physically, but almost emotionally. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is an emotional thing. And I think I talked earlier about my ex-husband probably having postnatal depression, which contributed to him not being interested in engaging in sex for more than a couple of years. I think that's probably an issue for an accredited clinical therapist, a psychologist or a psychiatrist to deal with, and maybe couples therapy. Certainly coaching can, the type that I undertake with couples and with individuals is helpful, but I'm always conscious of there being certain issues where someone with that clinical perspective being required to really work through those issues in a more intensive way than a book can provide. I think the emotional issues could be myriad, and I think working through those on an individual basis, my book probably is not going to. There's some tips in there in terms of communication and maintaining intimacy. There's chapters on those subjects, so there could be something worthwhile in there for people in that situation. But it is designed principally for women, even though, as I said, there's been a lot of interest from men as well.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I mean, obviously, I agree that from a clinical perspective, women continue to be underserved in the marketplace. But what's good is that there's a lot of good companies out there that do a lot with sex toys and different lubes and everything else that are definitely focused more on the female experience, which I think is great. And then, some of the other things that you talked about in terms of having the conversation. So one of the first people I followed on this topic, and this was pre-COVID, was someone by the name of Emily Morse. Sex with Emily in the US.
Yes.
She's pretty popular. I'm sure you've heard of
Yes.
her.
I listened to her podcast, yes.
Yeah. And, she always talks about the 3 T's: timing, turf, and tone when you're having these conversations. And not to be having them while all of a sudden you're getting it on, and then being like it's one thing to be like, hey, can you make an adjustment, versus getting into a full-on conversation while you're in bed together.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I talk about that in my book as well. I think it's well canvassed, that the time to talk about these issues is outside of the bedroom, and to bring it up. And like I said earlier in our conversation, hopefully my book is a conversation starter. I talk about using tools to help start these sorts of conversations, and that can be a movie that you're watching together, or a TV show, or a book or an article in the newspaper, that can start these conversations between you and your partner.
Well, there's the first season of Bridgerton right there.
Yeah.
I think from the 4th episode on, all of a sudden it was like, all right, game on.
Off to the races.
Yeah, they were off to the races. You talked about obviously being data-driven, and we were supposed to talk last week, but I wasn't feeling great. And so Rebecca was kind enough to agree to reschedule. And in The Economist of all places, right, the dodgy economist, very conservative, they talked about actually the importance of, if you measure basically your sex life and, you become more data-driven about it and you become more intentional about it, you're likely to have a better sex life. And they actually made that connection. And, they talked to all these different people and around the importance of, you can't hit what you can't see in terms of measuring, which obviously that is the essence of 3,000 orgasms, but also just the intentionality of it. And when it came across my my inbox, because I get some email alerts from them as a subscriber, I was like, whoa, wait, really? All right, cool. So I'll link to that article as well. But what is that, when you hear that a publication like The Economist is, talking about this, what does that say to you from a societal perspective?
Yeah, that blew my mind to hear it and see that article. It's, obviously from a self-promotion point of view, I wish I'd had a media release into their inbox before they wrote that, and they'd asked me for a quote. But I think it's a sign, isn't it, of where the conversation is going. And I don't know whether the journalist was based in the US or elsewhere. I just, anything that tells me that we're becoming incrementally more sex positive as a society is something that makes me happy. Because I think there is so much shame and guilt built into so many of us around sex. Even the younger Gen Zs, I think they're still grappling with these issues, slut shaming, all of the shame and negative connotations around particularly women's sexuality. The more that sex is highlighted as something that is normal and human and meant to be fun and enjoyable, that's really my goal in my career, is to promote sex as something normal and healthy and fun.
How do you talked about that you have children. So there's a lot of exposure to porn at a young age, right? And I know that there's ethical porn and everything else, but obviously kids are not going to be seeing what we'll call ethical porn, right? How do you, as a parent, try and balance, obviously, teaching your kids about, having a healthy attitude towards sex, but then also when their friends are talking about porn in the schoolyard type of thing?
Yeah, I guess it's all part of the process I've taken from a very young age with my kids, which I talked about earlier, is that I've kept those conversational links with my kids very open, and they know that I'm available to talk about these sorts of issues with them. I think they've both had things pop up on their screens somehow, despite the filters. And they've told me about those, which I'm really grateful for. And it's very affirming for me, I guess, to know that they've had those conversations with me when that sort of material has appeared for them. But I talk to them more generally about porn and how they are going to come across it. People are going to show them things, as you say, in the playground or on the train to school or whatever. I invite them to discuss it with me when they come across it, and that we can talk about it. And I give them the message that it's an unrealistic perspective, depiction of what sex is really like, and that they can always ask me questions to find out what the truth is in terms of what a sex life looks like. I make the point, even though they hate to hear it, that I've had a sex life, and and I don't go into detail about how many partners I've had or anything like that, but that I've had experiences with. They know that I've had 3 long-term partners, and that I've learned things along the way, and that I'm open and willing to discuss with them in a way that they'll be comfortable with, how to understand what sexual relations between a man and a woman is, and what they can be and what the potential is for them to be. And that's a very heteronormative discussion, but yeah. I also I say to them, if they ever come to me because they realise that they're attracted to the same sex, then that's something that I will accept. And I mean, the overarching words that I give them at any time we're talking about anything, whether it's doing something bad or whatever, as I say, I'll love them no matter what. No matter what they do, and they test me on it. They're like, "What if I do something and go to jail? Will you still love me?" And I'm like, "Yes, I will still love you." So,
And based on their ages, that's only going to get more interesting for you.
It is. Yeah, I know. And so I know we talked earlier about my studies, starting a Master of Sexology and maybe going on to do a PhD. And then I think I'm going to have teenage kids soon, and I just I don't know how that's going to work for me, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting time ahead, and maybe I'll write more about that journey in terms of creating a sex positive family environment. Maybe there's space in the market for some more information on that, because it is a passion of mine, and something that I really try and promote through my work.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that I don't see a lot of that. And it was, it would happen to be this person who I mentioned before, the pediatrician, that she's like, yeah, we focus specifically on puberty. Like, she has her pediatric practice, but her and her business partner, another doctor, they have this business where they focus on education around puberty, where they go in and talk to schools. They run different workshops for parents and for kids, and to kind of just normalize it. But it's still like very fragmented. Like, I'll connect you to, because I think it could be an interesting conversation, but it's like just these random connections that are out there. So because I think that I'm a Gen Xer, right? So
Me too.
so sex education was not really, I mean, like, you had like, oh, this is what happens during puberty, you get your period and all that. And there was kind of a sex education conversation in my household, but it wasn't very extensive. We'll just leave it at that. It was like, don't get pregnant. And that was pretty much it. And, and I think that it is good, because I think that also having the sex conversation earlier means that you can have a better conversation of what you can advocate for in your sex life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm already having, and the children have had it at school as well, around consent as an issue. I'm very big on that for both of them, so that, for my son to understand that consent is imperative, and for my daughter to understand that consent is imperative, and she has a right to say yes and then no, and to expect that when she says no, it stops, and that's fortunately that's become part of the curriculum here in Australia, but I know how difficult it can be in the United States with the fraught political culture to get this sort of information into schools. So it's an ongoing battle.
Yeah, like, so Seattle, for people who may be listening, who, maybe in Australia or whatever, Seattle's pretty liberal.
Yeah.
But in like the private schools where some of my friends go, I've heard that they talk a lot more about consent now. And that is definitely part of the discussion. I think it is, at least in non-conservative areas of the United States, I'm hearing more of that trend towards talking about consent, which, if nothing else, they don't cover anything else. Covering consent is probably the most important thing, right? And what that means.
It's a huge message.
That's huge. Like, if there's one message I would want my nieces and nephews to understand, it would be what consent actually means and how to advocate for yourself in those situations.
Absolutely, yeah. And not get yourself in situations, not getting, I mean, I talk to my kids already about alcohol and drugs, and that's part of a conversation that I have with them, that when you're intoxicated, you can't make these decisions, you can't advocate for yourself and keep yourself safe. And so it's all interrelated. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like the buddy system when they're little kids, and it's like, hey, make sure you stick with your buddy and everything. But it's like when you're going out with a friend, when you're going out with your friends, it's like, hey, make sure, like, are you okay? And even now when I meet up with my friends, we all text each other that we got back to our cars if we're walking, and it's, because it's dark here at like 4:30 in the afternoon this time of year, right? But we all text each other after we're, if we're walking back to our cars or taking an Uber home, we text each other that we all got home, and it's just part of, this is what you're, for better or worse, I think women are definitely more programmed to kind of do those check-ins
100%.
to make sure that like, hey, I'm good. Like, or you going home with someone, you good? Everything okay? Like,
Definitely. Yeah. When I was dating before my current relationship, so between my marriage ending and my current relationship, I had a wing woman, who I would text and I would say, I'm with this guy, here's his photo, this is the name he's given me, this is his LinkedIn, or his Facebook that I've seen, here's his phone number. If I don't message you in a few hours to say I'm okay, just, call the police. And fortunately, that never happened. But we are programmed absolutely to take those safety steps. And I would want my children to have that message as well.
Sure. So what I'd love to end on is when we were prepping for this call, one of the things you talked about was trusting your body. And I'd love to hear you talk more about that because I think that is such an important message. And I think it feeds into self-love and everything else. Like, you went through this, relationship, this long-term relationship that didn't work out. And everything that goes along with realizing that it's over and then actually ending it. So you probably had to learn a bunch of things about yourself in terms of that process.
Absolutely. Trust in my body is high now, but it's been rock bottom. My ex-husband used to criticize me and how I looked. I put on weight after our son was born. And I had quite a few health issues in regards to back problems, sciatica, and I never really trusted my body to do what I needed it to do in so many contexts. I couldn't stand up on my feet for more than a few minutes without getting back pain for so many years. I'd go skiing with friends and I just have to stay on the kids' slope because I just couldn't trust that my body would deliver me down the more challenging slopes. From a sexual perspective, in that marriage, I wasn't able to explore the fullness of what I think my body could have been able to do. And I don't have any regrets about that. I don't look back and blame my husband. I think he had his own set of issues going on. I think you get to a point, I'm 48 now, where you recognize all of the challenges along the way are really part of making you who you are. And I'm glad I had that experience because what came after it was in such contrast that it gave me an even bigger lesson than if I'd had an easy marriage, which, mind you, probably would have meant it wouldn't have ended. But in terms of the message for women reading my book or anyone reading my book, I think it's to take baby steps along the way. If you're feeling lacking in confidence in your body and what it can do for you in your daily life, but including in your sex life, I think educating yourself, talking about it, and that's either if you feel comfortable with your girlfriends, with friends, or with a therapist or a coach. Reading as much as you can about building self-love, trust in your body. I think somatic therapy can be a really great way to build that trust. And also doing work on self-compassion. That's something I've had to work on. Because I think as women, we're very critical of ourselves and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, a lot of shoulds and musts in our vocabulary, and we let other people off the hook. We give other people the benefit of the doubt, but we're really hard on ourselves a lot of the time, given the pressures that we're under. And so my message would be to, educate yourself and take those steps bit by bit to develop the trust. And like you said, move your body, try new things with your body, but do it carefully and under medical direction or with the help of, don't overdo things.
Yeah. But the thing is, I agree in terms of you have to kind of test yourself within reason, to kind of figure out what you like and what you don't like. Because when you started on this journey, there was probably lots of things you had never experienced before. And you kind of had to, venture out into the great yonder and be like, I don't know, this is going to work out. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
I mean, and I'm sure during the year there were ups. I mean, and you were dealing with COVID. There were ups and downs. You have to kind of work through it when,
Definitely.
And unfortunately, you had your cancer experience, and, you have to figure out like, okay, this is definitely like more of a trough as opposed to a peak. And you have to figure out a way to work through it, for yourself. I mean, if you have a partner there, that's helpful, but ultimately you have to do it for you.
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah, it has to be self-led. And when you're in the middle of it, it's really hard. But you hopefully have enough inside you to trust that the other side is out there and you'll get there one day.
Yeah. A lot of times I tell my clients, like, look, the only way out is through.
Yeah.
Which, people are like, for fuck's sake, Jill, really?
Yeah.
And, but it's true though. Whatever you're working through, the only way out of it is to go through it. You're not going to be able to like detour around it. Like, you might be able to, but it's going to come back at you. And it's going to come back at you harder.
Yeah. Yeah. I had about 3 times in the last 3 years where I thought I'd turned a corner on my cancer journey. And I literally, so 3 years and 2 months after finishing chemotherapy, just last month in December, I realized I was finally over it. And yeah, it's a long journey.
Well, we're going to end on that great note that you are over it, because
Yes.
I'm so glad that we
I
connect.
went through it and I got out.
Yeah, but I'm so glad that you're through it. And I've loved this conversation. It's been really good. And I hope
too.
it's the first of many. I'm
Me
so
too.
excited to get your book. And when we publish this, it'll be probably in early February. So it'll be right around when your book publishes. So I'll have the Amazon link ready to go.
Awesome.
This has been great. Her book is coming out, 3,000 Orgasms, Rebecca Ferguson, and I will link to it in the show notes. Rebecca, thanks for being on Going the Distance with Go Long. For anyone who's listening, you could find us on all of the socials, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Substack, of course. That's where we met. And you can find us everywhere. So you will see it linked. And so just remember, it's your life. Go the distance, go long.